All right, so are the French really as snobby as everyone says?
Hmm.
I mean, it's like a classic stereotype, right?
Yeah.
We've got this video exploring like the whole thing,
Okay.
and I thought it'd be fun to like kind of unpack it,
Yeah,
see where this idea comes from,
for sure.
and maybe debunk some myths along the way.
I love it.
What do you think?
Yeah, let's dive in. I mean, the video starts off talking about history,
Oh yeah,
like way back
like way back.
to Louis the 14th.
Versailles, exactly. All that extravagance.
Like those images are so iconic, right? The
Yeah.
opulent parties, the just like over the top displays of wealth.
It makes you wonder if that's where like this whole
The whole thing.
French elitism thing started.
Totally. And France was like the power player back then.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So it's not just about the parties.
Right.
It's about projecting this image of power and wealth.
Totally. Like to intimidate other nations, you know?
Like setting the stage for how the world sees them.
Like even centuries later.
Yeah.
But the video also talks about these intellectual salons
Yeah.
in the 18th and 19th centuries.
Those were wild.
Like these weren't just like casual get-together.
No. We're talking serious brain power here.
Right. Like Voltaire, Rousseau, all these big things.
Having these intense debates.
Shaping Western thought.
Like the Enlightenment, the Romantic movement.
So much came out of those gatherings.
I know, it's hard to even imagine.
Right. Like being a fly on the wall for those conversations.
Seriously.
So you've got this legacy of power, indie intellectual influence.
Potent combination.
Right. No wonder people think they're a little...
Superior.
Yeah. But I mean, the French Dio have a lot to be proud of.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, their food, their wine, fashion, art,
It's all top notch.
world class. And the video brings up this interesting point about the perfect baguette.
Okay, the baguette.
What do you make of that? Like, why focus on bread?
Well, I think it's brilliant, actually. It's not just about, like, a tasty loaf of bread.
Right.
It's about the tradition, the craftsmanship.
The precision, like their whole cultural philosophy is baked into it.
Yeah, it's not just something you eat.
Well,
It's like the symbol of their dedication to quality.
exactly. Doing things the right way.
The French way.
And you see that in so many aspects of their culture.
Yeah, oh, totally. It makes you think about how we view pride, you know?
Okay.
Is it always snobby?
Yeah,
Or is it just about valuing your culture?
right.
It's a tricky one.
It is.
And it kind of leads us to another big part of French culture.
Which is?
The language.
Ah, yes, the French language.
Beautiful, complex.
And don't forget about proper usage.
Oh, yeah, they're serious about that.
One little grammar mistake.
Whoa, you're in trouble.
Haha.
But there's this funny scene in the video.
No.
This sign in a Parisian cafe.
Uh-huh.
It says, "We speak English, but try French."
I love that.
It's kind of cheeky,
It is.
but it also shows how protective they are of their language. And I don't think that's necessarily snobby.
No.
Language is tied to identity.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So for them protecting their language,
It's like protecting their heritage.
it's a national treasure.
So maybe what we see as snobbery
Yeah.
is actually just a strong dedication to their values.
Kirby,
But here's the thing.
what's that?
The video makes a point of saying that Paris
Okay.
is different from the rest of France.
Oh, yeah. I've always wondered about that.
Right. Like, is the Parisian attitude a real thing?
I think it is.
You do?
Yeah, but I don't think it's necessarily about being snobby.
Okay.
I think it's more about the pace of life.
The city energy.
Exactly. Everyone's rushing. They're focused on their own thing.
So it comes across as aloof or even rude.
Yeah, but it's not personal, you know?
It's just the vibe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like when you go to New York,
Oh my gosh, yes. Everyone's so busy.
no time for small talk.
She's got to keep moving,
It's a global city thing.
not just Paris.
Right. And the video contrasts that with the countryside, where things are slower,
More relaxed,
people are warmer, more welcoming.
like two different worlds.
In the same country,
Makes you realize you can't just stereotype an entire culture.
whoop.
Have you ever experienced that kind of city versus country thing?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
It happens everywhere.
It's a good reminder that even within one culture,
Yeah.
there's so much diversity.
Totally. And speaking of cultural differences, that brings us to another point the video makes.
Which is,
Those differences can sometimes lead to misunderstandings,
oh, yeah, big time.
and that can fuel the perception of snobbery.
Absolutely. Like with communication style.
Right.
See?
The French are known for being subtle,
Very much so.
while other cultures are more,
Expressive.
yeah. So what might be seen as passionate in one culture?
Could be seen as aggressive in another.
Totally different interpretations.
Right.
It's like a whole other language.
It really is.
Like, they might not smile at strangers as readily,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean they're being unfriendly.
Not at all.
It's just a different social norm.
Different way of being polite.
It's like a classic example of French waiters.
Oh, yeah.
Some people find them cold or aloof.
But as the video explains, it's more about professionalism.
Right. And respect for the dining experience.
They have a certain way of doing things.
And it's not about being standoffish.
Nah.
It's about letting the food and the ambiance speak for themselves.
Exactly.
I've even heard people say that French waiters are like the epitome of snobbery.
Really?
But I just think it's a cultural difference.
Yeah, a different approach to service.
It's not about being aloof. It's about efficiency.
And discretion.
Right. You know, like just letting the experience be the focus.
And speaking of experience, that kind of leads us to another interesting aspect of French culture.
Okay.
The chic factor.
Ah, yes, the effortless style.
The attention to detail.
Making even the simplest things look elegant.
It's like a superpower.
Right. And it's not just about fashion.
No, it's about incorporating beauty into everyday life.
Like that scene in the video with the woman tying her scarf.
Oh, yes.
It was so simple, but so elegant.
Like an art form.
I know. It made me think of that saying, joie de vivre.
The joy of living.
Yeah. It's like the French find a way to infuse that joy into everything.
From the way they dress to the way they enjoy a meal.
Exactly. So it's an appreciation for the finer things.
But not in a materialistic way.
No, it's more about appreciating beauty and quality in everyday moments.
And that brings us back to our big question.
Okay.
Are the French really snobby?
Or just misunderstood.
What do you think?
Well, based on what we've seen so far,
Yeah.
I'm starting to think it might be a case of misunderstanding.
It's interesting.
Yeah. What we perceive as snobbery might actually just be cultural differences.
Deep-rooted cultural differences.
Exactly. And that's something to keep in mind.
Book base.
Whenever we encounter a culture that seems different from our own,
For sure.
so are the French snobby. Maybe not.
Maybe not.
But we're just getting started with this deep dive.
There's so much more to explore.
So stay tuned because we're going to unpack even more of this in the next part.
Can't wait.
You know, when we talk about cultural differences, we often focus on like the big things, right?
Language, customs, that sort of thing.
Exactly. But this video gets into some really subtle nuances.
Okay.
The kind of things that can easily be misinterpreted.
Like what?
Well, did you know that even like the way the French use their hands can be a thing?
Oh, yeah. Hand gestures are a whole other language.
Right. And the video talks about how the French tend to use more subtle hand gestures
Okay.
than cultures with more like expressive body language.
Interesting.
So what might be seen as animated or passionate in one culture
Right.
could be seen as aggressive or overbearing in another.
Oh, yeah. I've totally experienced that.
Me too.
Yeah.
Like I remember once I was in Italy
Uh-huh.
and I was having a conversation and like gesturing with my hands,
Yeah.
as I tend to do.
Uh-huh.
And the person looked at me like I was about to like start a fight.
Oh.
I realized later that my hand movements were probably too much for them.
Yeah, it's those little things that can really trip us up.
Totally. And the video talks about how that kind of subtle difference in communication
Yeah.
can sometimes play into that stereotype of French aloofness.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Right, like the whole reserved or distant thing.
Classic stereotype.
But the video suggests that it's not about being cold.
Okay.
It's more about respecting personal space and boundaries.
Makes sense.
Right. French culture tends to value privacy and discretion,
Uh-huh.
which some cultures might see as standoffish.
Yeah, especially those that are more accustomed to like...
Open displays of emotion.
Exactly.
But it's not that they're being rude.
Right.
It's just a different way of expressing themselves.
Different social norms.
Different ways of being polite and respectful.
And I think this ties back to our discussion about French waiters.
Oh, yeah. The video uses them as a prime example of how cultural differences can be misinterpreted.
Totally. Their formality can come across as...
Snobby.
Yeah. But we were saying earlier, it's more about their professional approach.
Exactly. And their respect for the dining experience.
That's not about them. It's about the food, the ambiance.
It's about the whole experience.
Exactly.
But you know what's interesting? Because I recently read an article
Oh, yeah.
about how the traditional model of French service is actually changing.
Really?
Yeah, apparently younger generations of waiters are more inclined to be friendly and engaging.
Like cracking jokes and stuff?
Yeah. It makes you wonder if it's a generational shift or if the culture itself is evolving.
That is fascinating. I wonder what's driving that change.
It's a good question. And, you know, speaking of change,
Yeah.
I think it's worth circling back to that difference between Paris and the countryside.
Okay. Yeah, we touched on that earlier.
But I'd love to, like, dig a little deeper.
For sure. It's such a key point because it challenges that whole monolithic view of Frenchness.
Right. Like, not all French people are the same.
Exactly. And as we said, Paris has this certain energy.
That city energy.
That can be a bit overwhelming.
Even for experienced travelers.
So it's no wonder Parisians might seem rushed or indifferent.
Especially compared to the slower pace of life in the countryside.
Right. It's like comparing apples and oranges.
You can't expect the same behavior in a bustling city like Paris.
As you would in a quiet village in Provence.
Totally different vibes.
And I think the video does a good job of showing that contrast.
Yeah.
It highlights the warmth and hospitality you find in rural France.
Which is so different from that stereotypical Parisian image.
Right. And it just goes to show that you can't paint an entire culture with one brushstroke.
You got to get out there and experience it for yourself.
Absolutely. Get off the beaten path, see the real heart of a culture.
And that's something everyone should do.
I agree. No matter where you're traveling.
Keep an open mind. Be willing to challenge your assumptions.
Embrace the nuances.
That's what makes travel so enriching.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
But, even with all this talk about cultural differences, there's still this question of the chic factor.
Okay, the chic factor.
Like, does that play a role in how we perceive the French?
That's an interesting question. I think the video addresses it subtly.
How so?
Well, remember that scene with the woman tying her scarf?
Oh, yeah?
It wasn't just about fashion. It was about demonstrating a certain finesse.
Like a mastery of the everyday.
Exactly. That attention to detail seems to be ingrained in French culture.
It's like they elevate even the simplest things.
It's an art form.
Yes. And it made me think about how much emphasis they place on aesthetics.
In everything.
Food presentation, interior design, you name it.
It's about incorporating beauty and refinement into everyday life.
Which some cultures might see as pretentious. But I think it's more about a different set of values.
A different way of seeing the world.
Exactly. And it's inspiring in a way.
It is. It makes you want to pay more attention to the details.
To find beauty in the everyday moments.
To slow down and savor the little things.
And that brings us back to our core question.
Are the French snobby?
Or are they simply misunderstood?
What's the verdict?
I'm leaning towards misunderstood. What about you?
I think so too, based on everything we've discussed.
It seems like what we often see as snobbery
is
really just a reflection of their cultural values.
Their pride, their dedication to quality, their appreciation for beauty.
It's a reminder that understanding a culture requires looking beyond those surface-level stereotypes.
And digging into the heart of what makes that culture tick.
And that's exactly what we're trying to do here.
With this deep dive.
We've barely scratched the surface, but we're running out of time.
Already?
I know. But don't worry, we're not done yet.
There's more.
Oh yeah, in our final part, we'll share some personal anecdotes and some final thoughts on how to approach cultural differences with more understanding and empathy.
Sounds good.
So, as we've been talking about all this, I've been thinking about my own trips to France. And there have definitely been times when I felt like I just didn't quite get it,
He didn't fit in.
Yeah. Like I remember this one time I was in a bakery in Paris. Trying to order a croissant.
Classic.
But I must have totally butchered the pronunciation. And the woman behind the counter gave me this look. Like I had just insulted her grandmother or something.
Oof. How do you know that look?
Right. I felt so awkward.
It's easy to misinterpret those kinds of interactions.
It is, especially when you're in a new place.
Yeah, and you're already feeling a bit self-conscious.
Totally. But looking back, I realize she probably just thought I was another clueless tourist.
Probably.
And it's a good reminder to check our assumptions,
At the door.
Yeah. Just because someone isn't super smiley or chatty.
Doesn't mean they're being rude.
Right. It might just be their way of being polite.
Different cultures, different customs.
Exactly. So instead of thinking, wow, that person was so unfriendly.
Yeah.
We should try to think about the cultural norms.
Like, what am I missing here?
Right. It's about shifting our perspective.
And trying to see things from their point of view.
Which is where empathy comes in.
Couldn't agree more.
Right. Empathy is so important for understanding any culture.
It really is.
It's about putting yourself in their shoes.
Trying to understand their world, their values.
And that takes a willingness to step outside our comfort zones.
To embrace the unfamiliar.
To challenge our own assumptions.
And be open to new ways of seeing things.
As we've been talking, I've realized something.
What's that?
Maybe what we see as French snobbery is actually about cultural self-preservation.
That's interesting. Tell me more.
Well, think about it. France has this incredibly rich history.
Centuries of tradition.
Exactly. So it makes sense that they would be protective of it.
Their language, their culture, their way of life.
It's not about looking down on other cultures.
Right.
It's about valuing and preserving their own.
It's about protecting their identity.
Yeah. And it reminds us that cultural identity is complex.
It's a tapestry woven from so many threads.
History, geography, language, values.
And if you pull on one thread too hard,
the whole thing can unravel.
That's a great way to put it.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into French snobbery, I think the key takeaway is this.
What's that?
It's less about actual snobbery, more about cultural differences.
That we often misinterpret.
Exactly. So to our listeners out there,
yes,
next time you encounter French culture, or any culture for that matter,
keep an open mind.
Be curious.
Embrace the unfamiliar.
You might just surprise yourself.
And who knows, you might even fall in love with the things that once seemed strange.
Well said. And on that note, we'll say au revoir.
Au revoir.
Until next time, keep exploring and keep those minds open.